Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Honest Conversations with Mo, the Mo Love podcast. In this episode, I want to delve into something that I really don't, really delve into on the pod, and that's we're gonna dive into love, and talk about relationships and things of that nature, and get right into it. I want to start off talking about how we look at how we become so infatuated with someone, um, and then how we can manage that infatuation and kind of turn that into insight. And really, essentially, kind of looking at infatuation and insight. To start off, in the sense of course, with infatuation, as just that overall journey that we take where we get enamored by, whether it's someone's looks, someone's essence, just from the jump. And then how do we kind of manage that to making that into something, long term, kind of a healthy, connection. And how do we, kind of build from that? And I can, speak, for myself where I, often make the mistake of, really getting caught up in, the look instantly. Cause, I'm very, honest and transparent in the sense of I know the type of, you know, woman I like, the type of woman I want just overall and, essentially get enamored, over from the jump and allow myself to, get lost in that. And, sometimes we forget that when we get lost in that, we try to find the the beauty in it all that we forget that, this individual has imperfections. And how do we go about handling those imperfections and not just seeing them, in this perfect light, th- of of how we initially, seeing them or how we interpreted them or in that sense. So when looking at, infatuation and insights, just how do we manage that forgetting to, kind of that misconception that we create early on within ourselves that this distorted perception of, oh, this person, hits on X, Y, and Z in terms of, what I like or, what I'm looking for. But that as we, began to, learn a person that we misconstrue exactly who they are and, kind of how do we bridge that with actual reality, and who they really are and who they truly are. And I think that's the important foundation, in whether it's, dating or, just finding someone as build along with them is how do you navigate that sense of infatuation to, you know, building something that's meaningful, building something that's necessary, that's long lasting. And I think from there, jumping into, how do we go about navigating, lust at first sight? In the sense that, we can become, you know, extremely, lustful and, just whether it's, satiating our appetite, whether it's, through, just casual sex or just through quick connection that we're really not really getting to know the person beyond their flaws. And I think it goes back to how I said, like, I know my type and, what I like as I mentioned earlier, but sometimes navigating that can, be a bit tough because you see that and you're like, oh, boom, that catches my eye. And, oh, I want that. I want to learn, more about that in that sense that we sometimes forget that, there's more to it. Um, and that we can't, just navigate, through lust. And how you go about navigating that is giving, an individual the chance to really learn them. But I think it's also important too to know when you're navigating that, is it aligned with, kind of what you want, and what you're hoping for in terms of, a connection. And I think for myself that I've always, tolerated, chaos. And I can admit that because it seemed that that was a requirement in the sense of, whether it's, seeking out chaos to feel like, oh, that chase, that drive to, that sense of accomplishment in a sense with it, now knowing that, what I really wanted, something healthy, stable, and, that's fueled with, loyalty and consistency. And I think that sometimes when we're navigating from lust, it's all right. It's also in terms of, those initial connections, those, whether it's, the first couple dates or just even, through, hey, how you texting with somebody? Is it the consistency, like for myself, I ask for myself, is this, the consistency I want? Am I tolerating chaos? And chaos could be, being willing to allow, mis mixed messages, or mixed signals in the sense of where, oh, feeling, strung along. And I think in the past, I can admit, I've definitely tolerated that, like I said, because I tolerated chaos. And, it was something that felt like, okay, I gotta I gotta get oh, I gotta find a way to navigate this to, like, oh, win, this person over. So I think knowing now that that's not something that I'm really up for is tolerating, those mixed messages or those mixed signals. Um, and not, allow myself to be strung along because like I said, I know what I want. And I think when you know how to navigate that lust, and whatever type of partnership you're looking for, it's important to know yourself and know what you're willing to allow, what you're willing to put up with, and that lets you be able to manage, hey, am I doing this because this is who I used to be, and this is how I allow love to impact me in the sense of how is it that you're truly, growing in love? Is it just something that you were, like I said, I think we've delved into in the past of the pod is just, what are you, willing to allow and what you're willing to tolerate? And I think that's, mm, you know, also more true for, love and navigating relationships. And especially, when we know the things we want, it's important to know, hey, how am I going to go about achieving this without compromising myself, without losing, that part of myself. And I think it's important to know who you are when dealing with that, because, like I said, it's easy to be lustful and um, just be content with that. But I think if you know you want something more, it's how do you go about, moving through that? And I think, you know, moving next into, how do we, go from lust to longevity? And that's, how do we get over the sense of those initial quirks, those initial things that we were, willing to put up with, um, that, felt euphoric, that felt, whether it was, feeding into our egos or whether it just, they say, satiating our appetite, and making us feel alive. And I think that's the thing about lust is that sometimes, it could definitely make you feel alive in the moment. But if it, if it doesn't last, then, what was it all for? And I think going about, navigating, lust longevity, not only just as I say, just in romantic relationships, but just in love, but also just, life overall where we have that high that we know that we're looking to achieve and we know that, we're capable of and how do we go about, all right, getting through the waves and navigating it and knowing, all right, we've come to where, we see what's achievable, what we see what, the whole ride was, worthwhile for. And I think it's about, finding that purpose of, all right, why did I, whether, as I said, in love and, what was the purpose of, getting with this person? Is it because, I was, let's say, for example, just alone and, lonely in a sense? Or was it because, I'm wanting to build something meaningful and I know this is the right person for me to build something that's long lasting? Is like I said, for myself, I want to build a legacy and I know that, I don't want to deal with anything that's half-assed because I don't like to, half-ass things. And I think it's important to know who you are and kind of what you want. That, yeah, it's okay to, be out here, having fun. But I think if you know you're wanting to build something sustainable and long lasting, how do you go about finding that overall purpose? And just knowing that wanting to cultivate a connection requires doing the work. That requires going from, those initial stages, those initial dates, and knowing how do you really truly going about cultivating the connection is something, meaningful. And just knowing that it is meaningful. Is it something that works for you? Because I think in navigating lust, as I mentioned, is knowing, hey, is it something you're willing to tolerate and not just being content with, what's available. I think it's knowing what works for you, what works for the other person, having, that healthy, honest communication, and knowing, where you both, want to see where things go, but also where you want to see yourselves go. Because I think it's important to always remember when it comes to relationship that, it's always two individuals, and two individuals, coming together, but in the sense of not being, um, dang, I'm always blanking on this word, but oh, not being, codependent on another person. I think that's the mistake that we sometimes make. I can admit, I've made that mistake before in the past. When you become codependent, you begin to, lose a part of yourself and knowing what you're not willing to tolerate, knowing what you don't wanna wanna give up about yourself, and knowing yourself overall is the most important part. And I think, like I say, it requires communication, requires that work, and requires, going through the tough stages because it's not gonna be easy. It's not gonna be something that just happens overnight, in terms of a meaningful, long lasting relationship, but it requires putting in that work, requires cultivating that connection to something that's sustainable and that's worth the longevity. Um, but, as I say that, I also am, very well aware that, right now that, I'm obviously, in this, I'm single, and, enjoying life, figuring out myself, and constantly, going about learning myself and, or, you know, entrenched in, who I am and, figuring out, what works for me and, what aligns with my values and, kind of what I want to see for myself. And then also remembering that it's expensive being single in the sense that obviously, outside of, the constant dates and, getting to know someone. But I think also the challenge of managing, that sense of loneliness. And I think sometimes that's the thing that comes at a cost that, we forget that, we're not due to, be in a relationship that is, not going to happen overnight. That gambler's fallacy of, you roll the dice and, you see, what connection you end up, getting into or building or not knowing, what'll be long lasting, of course. But I think it's important to remember also that the challenge of, that loneliness and, those lonely nights and how do you, kind of manage that for yourself? Are you, solo dating? Are you willing to, put yourself out there in terms of getting to know yourself? And I think that's the most meaningful thing. And that's why I feel like it's expensive being, single um, outside of, just, managing your own world, but managing how you want to see love for yourself. And I think that's what becomes expensive because it's easy to know that those lonely nights can feel like, oh, it's gonna, last forever. But I think if you know what you want for yourself, that those lonely nights are gonna be, worth it. Um, like I said, it's, we're not due to, be in a relationship or end up in love. It's gonna obviously, come and happen naturally for all of us. But it's also, are we, doing the work to, put ourselves out there, whether that's, putting shots up in terms of, you know, um, purposefully dating and knowing you're, trying to date at the moment, or if you're knowing, hey, all right, this is not a time or a moment for me to, date. Maybe, how are you going about focusing on yourself and feeding into yourself and pouring into yourself? And I think that's important too. And I think that's why, as much as it is in an investment in dating when you're single, but it's as much as it's just as important to focus on the investment in yourself when you're single too. And that's why, like I say, it can become expensive because it's at what cost are you willing to, value yourself at to make yourself more desirable, not only desirable, obviously, from another person, because we shouldn't require that desire or, seek out that external validation from others. But I think more so, how are you, requiring that desire from yourself? How are you, looking at yourself every day and knowing, hey, this is the person I want to be, and this is the person I want to continue to grow into and continue to become, because that's only going to make you better, only going to make you happier. And that's the most important person that matters is, is yourself and the love you're providing yourself. So I think that's uber important and just the most important thing overall. And that's why that's the worthwhile expense is how are you purposely investing in yourself, because, you know, you're the biggest investment that you can put into day in and day out. And how you get better, physically, mentally, emotionally, how are you managing your emotions, and knowing, hey, this is not what I want to tolerate, um, or how I want to react to things, or you know, hey, this is what I want to focus on, whether the different activities, healthy habits, and just knowing what goals you want to strive for yourself. And I think that's why it becomes expensive being single, because it's what investment are you putting into yourself day in and day out. Um, and then And then I think next is just knowing, obviously, with that, it's just knowing what to, how do you go about what to look for, beyond chemistry? In the sense that, we sometimes get caught up, in chemistry and, just feeling like we're immediately, compatible with a person. But I think beyond that initial chemistry, I think it's important to know, when you're dating, or if you are, in a relationship, that is this something that feels sustainable? Is this something that's worth investing into, and growing into? And do you feel like you are growing, within this relationship? And I think when we look beyond chemistry, beyond those initial signs that light us up and make us feel like, hey, this could be something. It's through those tough times, those tough moments, and you realize, hey, this is definitely, and you realize, and it clicks, like, yeah, this is something that's worthwhile. Um, and it's like, going back to myself, for example, that, I've made the mistake of, prematurely, whether it's concocting, an initial fantasy just, based off of and, wondering, what could be or, what could happen with this person. Like I said, to falling on the sword of, chemistry and being like, oh, we connected and, not really looking at, who this person is or who this person is becoming. And I think that's the most important part too, is as I said, it's two individuals and you're constantly growing every day and constantly becoming different people in your own rights. And I think how do you, manage to navigate, through that minefield of, coming together and, building something that's worthwhile. And I think when we remember that we know what we want, we know our values, what we're willing to tolerate, what we're willing to put up with, it becomes easier to look beyond chemistry because we know what is meant for us and what we're desiring. It's not worth giving that up just for, something, that feels, fleeting in the moment or feels so, euphoric or so, such a high that we sometimes forget that, love really is an investment in the sense of not only are you constantly, giving your time to another person, but you're giving you to another person. And I think when, like I said, or like I say, in the sense of, I knew what it was like to, lose myself in, a relationship and, move too fast and things like that. And knowing, hey, that's no longer, who I want to be or, kind of what I, want to do. I think that's why I say, that investment of, you willing to forego parts of yourself that you probably will never get back. And I think that's the most important part when dating and knowing, hey, is this a person that's gonna make me feel like I'm losing myself or a person that feels like I'm gonna, continually grow and, become the best version of me possible, and the best, become who I want to be. And I think, we talked about that before, knowing who we want to be. And I think that align has to continue to align, within love as well. And knowing, this person sees us for who we want to be. And we as well, we see them for who they want to be as well. So I think that's the most important thing too, is, it's a two-way street. It's going to be some ups and downs, but it's about navigating that and knowing, what to look for beyond, those initial signs seem seem hopeful. But I think when, it becomes real, we'll know when it's real because it'll feel right. And again, the sense of it'll feel right and it'll feel like, hey, this is something that I see myself becoming better in because not only do I want to do better for myself, but I want to continue to, do better with this other individual. So I think that's the most important thing when knowing what to look for, beyond chemistry. And then next segue into the NFL playoffs and what has been a wild playoffs thus far. Just got done finishing watching the Bills Broncos game where the Broncos pulled it out 33-30 in OT. What an incredible game. And this has been a fun playoffs. And right now, Seahawks, Niners are playing right now. Tomorrow we got Texans, Patriots, and then Rams, Bears as well tomorrow. So the playoffs has been fun thus far. I think they said, if I remember the stat correctly, yeah, 5 of the 7 playoff games have been nail biters, and and it's been incredible to watch. I'm still in aligned with my postseason prediction. I still got the Rams. Um and then I don't remember, did I say I had the Bills? I don't know if I had the Bills. I might have said the Bills. But on the AFC side, I always felt like it was gonna be a toss. But I think we'll take the Texans. I think the Texans might you know, will some will consider the upset will upset the Patriots in that Texans Broncos AFC Championship game. I'm going Rams Seahawks in that NFC Championship game, but we'll see. But yeah, playoffs have been fun. Super Bowls, getting closer and closer here. My Falcons cleaned house. Matt Ryan is in as our president of football, with figuring out who we're gonna hire as our head coach. That should be fun, and as well as our GM. Um, Figure out what we're gonna do with Kirk Cousins this off season. We restructured his contract to where his money becomes fully guaranteed on March 13th. So it's a matter of what we decide to do there. Obviously, we got still got Michael Penix, recovering from his ACL. So that'll, how things go there. Without a first round draft pick, how do we, navigate, the draft this offseason, free agency? Got a lot of key players to resign, from Kyle Pitts, Tyler Algier, Caden Ellis, resigning Jesse Bates, getting, resign or extending Drake London. Does Bijan's contract, do we extend him this off season? Um, Important guys like, that played a factor this year. Last year, they're they weren't making as much of a bag now, worthwhile in the sense of, guys like Lakel London. Is he gonna get, a nice deal from us, this off season? He offered, played his butt off and played his ass off in the sense of just, all the negativity that's, consistently thrown his way. We played incredible, despite our, injuries in the secondary. Tyler Algier, does he decide to come back, go get a bag elsewhere? Because, completely understand more than deservingly so. But yeah, it's going to be interesting all season for my Falcons. Quick tinge on that. But yeah, back to the playoffs in the sense of, yeah, it's been a fun playoffs, and we're gonna see. We're gonna see. And yeah, I guess I got like I said, the uh, Niners Hawks game is on right now. Obviously, got the Seahawks. Tomorrow, got the Texans, and then we got Rams over the Bears. But I feel like I don't know, but I do feel like the Rams got that one. So it's gonna be fun. Playoffs have been fun. Hope the games continue to be as incredible as today's, Bills Broncos game was. What back and forth game that was. Bo Nix, Josh Allen. I'll be feeling for Josh Allen. Just can't. This was his time. No Patrick Mahomes. No Lamar Jackson in his way. And it just happened to be the Broncos defense and Bo Nix. So it's understandable. But yeah, the playoffs has been fun to watch thus far. And speaking of playoffs, college football playoffs coming down to the end, our national championship game in college football between the University of Miami versus IU, Indiana University, in the University of Indiana. They don't say IU. They say University of Indiana. I don't know why I say IU. Anyways, but yeah, that should be a fun one. Uh, Mendoza versus that, Canes pass rush should be a great one. You know, Carson Beck versus IU's defense. It's gonna be a fun game. I'm going with the Cinderella story in IU. I know we said Miami wasn't supposed to make it in the playoffs. Obviously, they've shown why they deserve to make it, and obviously made it to the national championship game, playing the national championship game at home in Miami. But I got IU, and I think they're gonna pull off a Cinderella story in the sense of the best season in their program history, and they go undefeated. I think that's what happens, and I think IU's going for the chip, and it's just gonna be a magical season. But I think it is interesting when Indiana does make it to the top of the mountain, since like the Pacers making it to the finals last year, etc. That they typically typically fall flat, but I believe in Indiana and the Hoosiers, so I think they'll pull this off. And I think they'll win the national championship. And Signetti leading in a program that's never seen such success in his first year. Uh, just gonna be incredible. But yeah, I got Indiana winning the national championship. The next, speaking of Miami, we got Unrivaled in Miami back again this season. Chelsea Gray balling out, leading her squad in the Rose, and balling out there. I think they're 2-1. Um, I forget who's number one in the standings right now. I can't remember. But shout out to my young team, the Breeze, balling out, with that young squad, Paige Beckers, Rikia Jackson, 2-1, they balling out themselves. Even though the Lunar Owls are not obviously looking the best, 0-3, obviously without their fearless leader in Nafisa Collier. Marina Mayberry's been balling out of her mind. I was not expecting that with the Owls. Who else across the league has been balling? I mean, point guard Chelsea Gray though, but that's just bar none. And the Rose, I think, might got it locked, but we'll see. Obviously, as they head to Philly soon. And yeah, still no WNBA CBA updates. They missed the 2 deadlines, so that'll be interesting as those continue. But yeah, Unrivaled has been fun thus far this season. We continue to get closer and closer. As they, like I said, they're about to head to Philly soon. Yeah, I'm excited for the one-on-one tournament. That should be fun. But yeah, Unrivaled season thus far early on. It's been fun watch. It's been great games. The stud bud commentary, everything. I just really enjoy what, Unrivaled does, from, Kelsey Plum struggling to write on the camera with the marker to Dierges Hamby's, water shower was interesting. But yeah, they always have fun at Unrivaled, and it's been a great season thus far. What has not been a great season is, I wouldn't say it has been a great season. There's been a lot of disarray of late in Lakerland, from our Lakers, in the sense of we've been not only, dealing with the talk from, in terms of, trade talks, from outside sources, that, external noise that's impacting the team, but also just the overall, chemistry with the team, whether, lack of defense, just lack of pure effort that I've been noticing consistently. Yeah, what currently 24-15. We play later tonight against the Trailblazers. But yeah, it's just been inconsistent and been frustrating. But hey, we'll get through it. I think we'll figure it out. I think obviously we're getting closer in the league with, the trade deadline. We saw Trae Young get moved to the Wizards as he requested. I feel like we're gonna still start to see more trades coming through. Obviously what my Lakers do, I won't know, but it'll be exciting what we end up doing, because I feel like we do have to make a move. Um, John Morant's, working with the Grizzlies on getting traded. Jonathan Kuminga requested a trade from the Warriors. But yes, it's gonna be interesting. Does Giannis get traded this trade deadline? I don't think it's gonna happen, but yeah, it's gonna be interesting what happens during the trade deadline. Obviously, we'll get into that. Yeah, early on in the season, it's been fun. Not obviously from my Lakers side, but just across the league, it's been fun to watch. Is there a team that I think just obviously still Detroit's been standing out, to me, for sure. Obviously the Spurs, they're young. I mean, we know, the Thunder have been balling, even though they slumped a little bit, but getting back to their winning ways. But just hoping, my Lakers figure it out as we, it's a long season, we got to get towards, All-Star break, trade deadline. So it's going to be interesting, what happens there. I think we should be getting Austin Reeves back soon. And yeah, I think having a full squad and figuring out the missing pieces that we need, which I know we need. We're missing a point of attack defender, and I think we do need for sure. I mean, we need another wing, and I want to say center maybe ish, because Aiden's been solid, but I think if we had another, and Jackson's been solid as well, but I think they just, I don't know. It's gonna be interesting just the moves we make, but yeah. Lakers have been frustrating this far to watch. But we're gonna get it. We're gonna get this together and we're gonna be fine. Still championship year. We're still getting the chip this year, so it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. Um, and then jumping into, top four, my favorite album currently at the moment. I'll say Young Blues album that he just dropped. I have been listening to that on repeat. Blanking on the name right now. But I've been listening to that. Really haven't really had like a set album off the jump, but I say it's that one that's been standing out early on in the year. Favorite show to watch currently. What if I will watch it currently? Oh, Stranger Things. I finished Stranger Things. I binge watched it during the whole over the winter break, and then finished it top of the year. But what an incredible show! Getting I wasn't expecting to get through it that fast, but really is such a phenomenal show, from the storytelling to the character development to just just how they layer in all the different characters and kind of allow the story to truly flow, because it really it had obviously had it's a bit repetitive moments I felt, but I think overall the story that they were trying to capture and allowing the characters to grow, we saw that natural growth of each character, and the role they played within the overall show and the overall story was was phenomenal. Just how integral each character was, the characters that they introduced, and yeah, just an impeccable show. Has entered my top 10. Obviously I'll go top 10 all-time shows, yes, but I'll have to go back and rewatch it from beginning to end, obviously. But off initial reaction, yeah, it's such a phenomenal show. The ending, if you haven't finished it, but uh no, I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, I say it could have been done better. I'll just say that it could have just been done better. But yeah, regardless, still a phenomenal show. And then what do I currently have going on? Obviously, back into the flow of things. Within this new year. As I said, my focus for this year, just you know, getting back to finding joy, finding the things that that light me up, and allowed me to become the best version of myself, but also taking those necessary risks to become that best version of myself, and allow myself to whether it's taking on compliments more, but just being more gracious to myself, like I said, just finding that joy just overall in life and the things I do, and being more assured of myself in terms of that transparency of who I am, you know who I am, when I'm by myself with, who, people see me as, and just allowing that, to fully mesh and, be seamless in terms of, being, consistent, day in and day out, and how I show up in the world. And, that's just, kind of what I've been working on, within this new year early on, the goals I have set for myself, sticking to, the boundaries I've set for myself, and just, how I want to, get better day in and day out. And then what I'm looking forward to is, taking more trips this year, building, healthy relationships, healthy connections. And then obviously, surprise 2626, if you ever heard, the fall off is real, and excited and looking forward to hearing, what seems to be, J. Cole's, last album, his magnum opus, 10 years in the making of, what this body of work will be. As a Cole stan, I'm excited to hear this. More than likely, for sure, going to go back and listen to all the projects as he's ever released, including, obviously unreleased unreleased materials and things like that. But just going back through his discography and, really, getting back to, the joy of, listening, Cole, from the come up, and now obviously now, to the fall off. And as he said, I think the the messaging, within this album, and just, knowing, the fall off is truly inevitable, for all of us. And I think how he's gonna, allow this story to fully, come together. I'm excited for not only, for him as a fan, but I think, the music that we'll get, but also, how, I'm gonna be able to, digest the music and, take it all in. So that's gonna be fun as well. And how does it, influence, how just, I don't know. I'm just excited for Cole. Excited for the fall off. And it should be fun. And, you know, I feel 2026 is probably about to be an amazing year for music. And just like 10 years ago, obviously, as people have been looking back to 2016, which was another incredible year for music. But not to just, harp back on the past, but just knowing, looking ahead of, the endless possibilities for this year, and, how I can see, become a better version of myself. And yeah, excited for Cole, excited for the fall off. I hope y'all are too. But yeah, as always, appreciate y'all listening. Like I said, as always, to my ramblings, and listening to, another episode of, Honest Conversations with Mo, Mo Love Podcast. And until next time, guys, peace.